Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, think about this. How does a country, a kingdom no less, completely change its identity, becoming a people's republic in, what, just over 20 years?
Yeah, it's a really dramatic shift, especially for a nation born right out of that post-colonial wave.
Exactly. So today we're going deep into the history, the really quite turbulent story, and the eventual, well, downfall of the Royal Kingdom of Laos.
And we're working from some really fascinating historical accounts here. Gives us a good view of the forces at play.
Our mission, as always, is to pull out the key insights, the important bits, really, give you a clear path to understanding what was going on, the politics, the outside influences.
All the key moments and pressures that led from this monarchy to, well, a totally different kind of state. It's quite a story.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The Royal Kingdom of Laos, Phra Racha Anachak Lao, I think?
That's the one. It officially came into being in 1953, freshly independent from France.
Right, breaking free. And it existed until December 2nd, 1975. So, yeah, about 22 years.
Intense years, definitely. And it started out, on paper at least, as a constitutional monarchy.
Okay, so king as head of state, but within a democratic framework.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Constitution laid it out pretty clearly, democracy, constitutional monarchy. That was the ideal. But interestingly, the government was based in Vientiane.
Ah, but the king wasn't there.
No, the monarch, King Sisavangvong, stayed in the traditional royal capital, Luang Prabang.
So a kind of split right from the start.
Yeah.
Administrative center versus the royal seat.
Yeah, an interesting dynamic. And King Sisavangvong, he was the first monarch under this new system. Prince Sivanafuma became the first prime minister after the Geneva Accords in '53 recognized the government.
Okay, so you have the key figures, the structure. It sounds like a hopeful moment, a fresh start.
It certainly had that potential, but the problem started almost immediately. Our sources really paint a picture of just constant internal political chaos.
Chaos how? Like disagreements.
More than that, they kept trying to form coalition governments, right?
Yeah.
Bringing different factions together.
Makes sense, trying to unify.
Yeah, but most of these coalitions were incredibly short-lived. They just couldn't hold together. Too much instability, too many deep-seated rivalries, maybe. It wasn't just about policy differences.
So fundamentally unstable internally. And what about outside forces? You mentioned those earlier.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Laos became, well, a pawn in the Cold War, basically. There was significant intervention from major powers.
The U.S. specifically.
The U.S. features heavily, yes. Their involvement is often cited as a major factor contributing to the instability, not resolving it.
So internal conflict just gets worse because of external meddling.
Precisely,
Yeah.
and it escalates, becomes a full-blown civil war.
Okay, so who are the main players in this war?
You had the communist Pathet Lao, that means Lao Nation or Lao land, and they were getting strong support from the Soviet Union and also North Vietnam.
And on the other side?
The Royal Lao government. They supported the monarchy, the existing system, and they received a lot of backing from the United States.
A classic proxy war scenario, then.
Textbook example. And because the Royal Kingdom ended up allied with the U.S., things got even messier internally.
How so?
Well, instead of stable democratic rule, you see a series of coups d'etat, military takeovers, periods where military dictators were effectively in charge.
So much for the Constitution. Any specific examples jump out?
Yeah, the sources mention figures like Phami Nosavan and Kong Lavirasan leading coups. These weren't just blips. They showed how much power the military really held, often overshadowing the civilian government.
Undermining the whole idea of a constitutional monarchy, right? Where the military is supposed to be under civilian control.
Exactly. And then there's the really concerning stuff about CIA operations.
Drug operation.
Yeah, the sources point to the kingdom getting tangled up in CIA drug trafficking activities. This wasn't just some side issue. It seems to have really corroded the government's legitimacy from within.
Wow. So coups, foreign intervention, alleged drug ties. It's a recipe for disaster.
And it fueled popular discontent. People start losing faith in the system. This eventually leads to a really significant student movement.
Students getting involved politically.
Very much so. There's this key date, November 21st, 1975. 21 student groups in Vientiane held this big rally.
What were they demanding?
The abolition of the monarchy itself, a pretty radical demand coming from within the capital.
That's a huge shift in public mood. What happened with these student groups?
Well, crucially, they didn't just protest. They eventually joined forces with the Pathet Lao.
Really? So the students allied with the communists?
Strategically, yes. And that alliance was a game changer. It gave the Pathet Lao a significant boost, not just in numbers, but in sort of popular legitimacy within urban areas, too. Their advance really picked up steam after that.
It sounds like the kingdom was really teetering by this point. What were the final stages?
Well, there was an attempt to stop the fighting. A ceasefire was agreed February 1973. This followed the Paris Peace Accords between the U.S. and North Vietnam.
A glimmer of hope.
Maybe. And they tried one more time to form a unified government. April 1974, the Provisional Government of National Unity. Prince Sivannapphuma, back again as prime minister.
A last-ditch effort, it sounds like.
Pretty much. But the reality was, by then, the Pathet Lao already controlled huge swaths of the country. Their position was very strong.
And the regional situation wasn't helping the royal government either, I suppose.
Not at all.
Mhm.
You have to look at the bigger picture. April 1975, that's when Saigon and Phnom Penh both fell to communist forces.
Right, Vietnam and Cambodia.
Exactly. That sent shockwaves. And it really emboldened the Pathet Lao. They saw their chance and moved to effectively liberate Vientiane around the same time, April 75.
And with that student support solidifying.
Yeah, any realistic chance for that coalition government to actually work just evaporated. The momentum was entirely with the Pathet Lao.
So the definitive end, when did the monarchy officially cease to exist?
The final moment came on December 2nd, 1975, in Vientiane. Crown Prince Vongtsavang, the king's son, delivered King Suesangvathana's former abdication letter to the Pathet Lao forces.
Just handed it over. Wow.
A formal end to centuries of monarchy.
And then what? What replaced it immediately?
The transition was swift. The General Assembly met, voted unanimously, and established the Lao People's Democratic Republic.
The LPDR and the leadership.
Prince Suphanavong, ironically, another royal prince, but the leader of the Pathet Lao became the first president, and Khaesong Pham became prime minister and the head of the ruling Lao People's Revolutionary Party.
So a complete transformation, a socialist state emerges.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A radical break from the past.
Okay, so let's just pull this together. What are the big takeaways for us, for you listening?
Well, you have this kingdom, Laos, born out of independence with, hopes for a constitutional monarchy.
Right, designed that way. But it gets absolutely battered by internal political fighting.
Yeah, constant instability.
And then crushed by these huge external Cold War pressures. It just couldn't withstand it.
And the result, in just over 2 decades, is a complete flip to a communist state.
It really underscores how vulnerable newly independent nations can be, doesn't it? Especially when caught between superpowers.
It really does. And it leaves you with a pretty big question, I think.
Which is?
Well, considering this history, all the outside interference, the deep internal splits, what does the story of the Royal Kingdom of Laos actually tell us about the long-term damage of these proxy conflicts?
And maybe how much real control, how much agency a smaller nation actually has over its own path when it's stuck in the middle of these global power struggles.
Exactly. It's something that resonates way beyond Laos, even today. Makes you think, doesn't it?